So I'm ready to go here. I'm ready to go. I just had a 2-hour marathon podcast talking about the Beatles.
Why?
The conversational juices are flowing. I'm ready to go because of the film Get Back. Very exciting for Beatle maniacs everywhere.
Is that you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why?
You're not a Beatles guy?
No.
I don't know. Well, just grew up listening to the Beatles. My parents liked the Beatles. My mom was part of original Beatlemania. She saw them on the original tour here in Montreal back in the early 60s. I appreciate their artistic catalog. And I think just I really enjoyed this film, The Beatles Get Back, just as a glimpse into this creative process that I think is really kind of unprecedented. I've never really seen anything quite like it. It's this really fly on the wall documentary, really digging into this couple of weeks that they spent together making this Let It Be album and doing this rooftop performance, which has become very kind of iconic. Very, very interesting to see the creative process behind the scenes kind of taking place and all the decisions being made. And I think if you're interested at all in songwriting or the creative process, I think it's pretty cool. But I'm a Beatles guy already, so I was already sold.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I can't say I was ever really a fan. And when I had Max from Eve 6 on Deep Dive a couple weeks ago, he really tried to sell me on the Beatles, and I just, they're fine. And I'm not even trying to be a contrarian. I just I never got into it. And I know they're influential, and everybody has been influenced by them in some way, and they just transformed music and all these different genres. That's fine. I just never really got into it, and I sure that probably makes me a piece of shit, or I don't care. I don't know.
It doesn't make you a piece of shit. That's fine.
Yeah, everyone wants to be fucking dead because I don't like the Beatles. I don't know. I don't get it.
Well, that's the thing. I don't know if not everyone responds to that kind of genre of boomer rock from the 60s and 70s. You know, I love that stuff.
I mean, some of it's fine.
I grew up listening to it.
It's just not that I never liked that. I really loved The Who. I still do. I love The Who. I guess Rush came later, and that was more progressive. But I like, The Doors a lot. I love The Who more than probably anybody in that era.
Okay.
And Pink Floyd's fine. Back when I did a lot of drugs, Pink Floyd was on heavy rotation.
Yeah. Well, you see in this film, actually, you see the progression because Alan Parsons, as a young guy, producer, he's like a sound engineer working on this album. Alan Parsons, who later went on to be involved in the production of Dark Side of the Moon, as well as his own Alan Parsons project. They got that great track Eye in the Sky, and you see this progression begin. You see him as a young man. That's what I mean. I think it's interesting. I would actually recommend checking it out, even if you don't count yourself as a fan. I just think it's a really fascinating look at this really kind of iconic band at this sort of crossroads moment, and you get a really unprecedented kind of behind the scenes look at what's going on, and just specifically a look that really goes in depth about this creative process and songwriting and that stuff. I just think I'm quite interested in that, but it's also 7 hours long, so you gotta really buy in if you're into this. I don't
know if I'm gonna be able to commit to that. I could, Squid Game is probably the longest I could invest in something.
Yeah,
consuming, watching. I don't like watching TV. I just find it really boring. I don't like passive consumption, if that makes sense. I like more interactive things because I like to, I like my
gamer.
I like to be involved. Yeah, I mean that's why I like
gaming lifestyle.
I like gaming because it's you're thinking, you're participating, you're shaping it. I don't know, man. I just can't watch TV. I liked Squid Game though. That was it. And then I watched a couple episodes of I Think You Should Leave. I'd never seen it, but those are 10, 15 minutes each. And I'd watch 3, and it's about 45 minutes. And I'd think, okay, that's enough. I gotta stop.
And now you get all the memes.
Some of them. I finally saw the hot dog thing. The honk if you're horny one with Connor O'Malley. I understand that one now. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Happy to be part of the meme conversation now.
You were saying something about, before we started, you were saying something about that Spotify.
Oh yeah, because you were talking about the Beatles, and Spotify Wrapped came out, and I saw everyone's posting all their stuff, and I saw some guy who posted his. I can't even remember who it was, just some random person. He posted his, and his total minutes listened last year or this year were 200,000 some. 200,000 some minutes listened. And mine, I listen to music a lot, and mine was 73,000. And I thought that was kind of high. This guy had 200 some thousand, and his top artist was the Beatles. And I thought how fucking miserable of a listening habit do you have where you've got 200,000 minutes, and it's like mostly the Beatles. That sucks. That fucking sucks.
Yeah, I saw that guy. I did see that guy. He ended up getting ratioed on his Spotify Wrapped.
Oh, did he?
Which I had never seen before. Yeah, he got like so many people started making fun of him.
Yeah, that sucks. There's so much music out there, and you've got 200,000 minutes, and most of it's the Beatles.
That's the thing. I listened to probably a lot of Beatles this year. Definitely not 200,000 minutes. So
yeah, I don't know if I've put a Beatles song on at all in the past several years.
I go through at least a Beatles phase of about a month each year. Sometimes I'll put on the odd song. Usually it's the album Rubber Soul, because that was the first one that I listened to. Yep. I usually devote about a month out of the year to get really obsessed with that again. But this year also, because of this film coming out, I started revisited Let It Be, which is always kind of like one of their lesser regarded works because of how messed up the recording process was. But you kind of appreciate it in a different light when you see behind the snes of the creative process and all the decisions that were being made behind the scenes. It breathes a little bit of new life into this album, which I kind of enjoyed. But again, I'm not gonna sell anyone. If you're not a Beatles fan, it's fine. I don't feel particularly emotionally that strong about it that I would get mad at anyone for feeling that way.
Yeah, I don't really care either way. I just don't get the hype. My listening habits I thought were really funny when it gives you a breakdown of the top 5 genres and subgenres you listen to, and this part like cracked me up because my categories were top number 1 metalcore, 2 death metal, 3 progressive metal, 4 alternative metal, and 5 hardcore. And I thought like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, you're getting all the different genres in there.
Yeah, I got a lot of diversity in there.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't use Spotify, so I don't get one of these year-end wrap-up things. I use YouTube Music. But if I did, it's like this was really the year that I really embraced the like dad rock aesthetic. I would easily say my most listened to artist this year was Steely Dan. I got heavily Dan pilled, and I was already somewhat Dan pilled.
Yeah.
But my Steely Dan obsession got exponentially increased this year. Listened to a lot of that, a lot of Phil Collins in there, Dire Straits, Michael McDonald, the Doobie Brothers.
You love 80s music.
Yeah. I do enjoy that era.
Yeah, you like the synths,
the 70s and 80s.
The synth pop. That's your shit.
Yeah. This is just all the stuff that I remember driving around listening to when I was growing up.
You know they like release music now,
wagon.
Right? You know that, right?
Yeah.
Like music still comes out like weekly.
Yeah, I know. Okay. I think the last time I made an effort to like keep up with popular music was like 2014, and I just haven't paid much attention since that time. I like actually made an effort. I got into that like War on Drugs album and Future Islands and a couple of those things. That was the last time I was like listening to albums that were being released in that actual year. I haven't really paid much attention.
That era had such a distinct sound, like that I just didn't really care for.
Yeah, you're more into like heavy stuff. Nothing wrong with that.
I want to be mad when I'm listening to music.
Yeah, exactly.
I want that catharsis.
Usually I'll go through a little bit of a phase each year where I'll kind of get back into that stuff because I have a history of being quite into the same kind of heavy music and hardcore and metalcore and that kind of stuff. But this year really just has been the year of dad rock for me, though. I've really embraced the whole aesthetic.
Yep.
Just leaning right into it. I can't get enough.
Rob, we're going to record a couple episodes soon to be released over the next month because I'm heading out of town. I'm heading to Europe. This is the first time I'm ever leaving the States, which I find just kind of nuts.
Oh, wow.
I've been to Niagara Falls, but that doesn't really count.
No, it doesn't really count.
But you're holding down the fort, so people can keep an eye on episodes coming out. But I need your advice, a couple things. So, things to do in some of these major cities where I'm going, but also like for international travel, like I'm a big anxious traveler. How many days early do I need to get to the airport? Like 3 days early?
Yeah, definitely. Bring a little pop-up tent. You want to get there at least 72 hours in advance and just make yourself comfortable. That should give you enough time.
Okay, cool.
Are you one of these, like, do you show up to the airport early or you like show up there right at the last moment? I'm one of those people. I always intend to show up at the right time and then I'm late because that's just how I operate.
I am a 2 hours early guy.
All right.
I give myself
kind of a centrist.
I give myself optimally an hour from when I get out of security to boarding time. 45 minutes to an hour, because that just gives you so much buffer time in case there's delays in security or whatever. It used to be so much worse, and it's gotten better. It used to be so much worse in the States, but I am an anxious traveler. I hate it.
Yeah.
The flight is fine.
Yeah,
I don't mind being on a plane. I'm not afraid of flying. Like I enjoy it. I think it's fun. But it's the security theater, navigating the security theater and dealing with the airport in general is what stresses me out.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan either. Where are you going in Europe?
So starting in Berlin, be in Berlin for a few days, then going to Prague for a few days, Vienna, and then going to Zermatt, Switzerland, which I don't know if you know where that is. Southern Switzerland. And it's a little mountain town at the foot of the Matterhorn in the Alps. It's beautiful. And then Florence, and then Rome for New Year's, and then home.
Oh my goodness.
That's
exciting.
Quite the trip.
I'm excited for you. Yeah. Are you like nervous at all about the coronavirus?
Oh, totally.
Stuff like with
Yeah.
We got new variants now happening.
New variant just dropped.
Yeah.
I am.
Great.
I'm a little concerned, but I'm trying to not. I'm good with the exception of traveling, which is weird because like in this case, like as it relates to just getting into the EU and like traveling around there, I'm not really worried because like if one country closes its borders, you're like in Europe. You can just take a train wherever you want, and we'll just like call an audible. So I'm not really worried about that so much. Is navigating the confusing and complex like testing and entry form requirements for each country, because you're mostly good to go wherever, but like for instance, to get into Germany, I don't think you need a PCR test, but I'm getting one anyway just to be safe. To get in to Czechia from Germany, you need a test. If I were to go direct from the United States, I wouldn't. And then to go from like Czechia to Austria, I might need a test. To go from Austria to Switzerland, I probably need a test. And then I don't know if I need one to get into Italy. It's like so confusing. It's really, really weird. It's good that they're like obviously taking it seriously, but like also now Austria is in lockdown until the 13th and we get there the 14th. So if that gets extended, no Vienna, but we'll see.
Yeah. Overall, like I feel like there's people trying to talk about this new variant and kind of expressing it in the most apocalyptic terms possible. Have you noticed that? There's kind of a certain subsect of people that kind of tweet and talk about this stuff.
They love it.
And are really interested in making people as afraid of as possible. And obviously it's something that should be taken seriously, but it still seems like from what I understand that like if you are vaccinated, you still are pretty unlikely to have a serious illness as a result. But people have been talking about this like it's the new, like it's the big one that kind of everyone has been waiting for. Have you noticed that at all too, this kind of phenomenon?
Yeah, and some of like the preliminary findings that I read anyway seem to dispute that. But there's this knee-jerk reaction from a lot of people who have made their brands just kind of like COVID watchers and COVID fearmongers to be like, look how contagious it is. Like, it is, but the way these viruses mutate, it's for survival. It's not to kill their host. That's just like the natural progression of viruses. So it looked like there are promising signs that like while contagious, this has mutated to just find as many hosts as possible without like killing them or being or inflicting serious harm and damage. That isn't the case obviously if you're unvaccinated, but like it seemed like I think preliminary data out of South Africa that I had read showed that it was there in September or October, most likely. And while like cases increased, the number of hospitalizations and deaths and people relying on ventilators, those numbers remained stagnant. Those were just like pretty consistent across the board. So that indicated that while people are getting it more, it's not like you're saying, like it's not this like the big one. That's just like that's how viruses evolve.
Yeah. And it was also really telling as well how, because this was like discovered and cataloged in South Africa, which doesn't necessarily mean that's where it started. No. But all of a sudden, like travel to South Africa is restricted and all these like, connections to South Africa, ensuring that that's going to do anything at all to stop the spread of it when it's highly likely that it was already kind of out there prior to that. But then the Joe Biden administration and others have to kind of make this show of doing something about it. So they imply that somehow South Africa is this problem zone that you can just cordon off, which is not really true. It's not really going to help anything.
No, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we find out later that it started in some predominantly white country, like a European country or the United States, and I believe there's already evidence of that. Oh, so, yeah. So it's just this. It's this reaction that it's this like overtly racist reaction once it was like initially like publicly acknowledged by South African authorities.
Yeah, and it's also extremely ridiculous as well the way South Africa and many other places throughout the world, especially the developing world, have been begging the United States, especially in the big pharma companies that produce these vaccines, to drop the intellectual property restrictions on this so they can produce the vaccines to get their populations vaccinated. Of course, at the beginning of the Joe Biden administration, they kind of like made a move to suggest that they were going to do that and soaked up the positive headlines about it, but haven't actually done it. And that is exactly how these variants keep emerging, because of the fact that it's allowed to kind of be out there for so long. These countries are not getting the vaccines that they need to stop it, and inevitably these variants emerge. And then they respond to that by, instead of getting the vaccines to these countries, restricting travel and trying to lock down like that. It's been a really frustrating conversation because like this has been a year now pretty much that these countries have been begging for more vaccines. No one in some position to actually do anything about that is really doing it. And lo and behold, the virus is not going away. The pandemic's not going away. And this is just going to lead to ultimately more variants happening if they don't make more of an effort to actually get these countries vaccinated.
Yeah, it's maddening that we are still having this discussion, that there isn't this universal consensus that like we shouldn't be privatizing these types of things. This is a global health crisis and it requires global cooperation. And when you have a couple for-profit pharmaceutical companies who are locking down the formula for the solution for profit, it's reflective of a toxic terminal rot in our society. That when we have these things that we're faced, collectively we're facing, that you still have enterprises and institutions in the world who will put their bottom line before humanity. And the problem is capitalism, and nobody with authority or power is willing to challenge that. It's really, really frustrating.
Yeah, and it's also extra frustrating that we're living in these societies where we have access to these free vaccines, and we still have these huge parts of the population that have turned this into some kind of political issue about personal freedom and stuff, and they're just not getting the vaccines that these developing nations are begging for. And you even have some of these like anti-vax communities kind of making this case to like, look, Africa is not getting vaccinated either. Like we're similarly skeptical about this, and it's like, no, they want to be though. This is the issue. They want the vaccines. They just don't have them. We have them. And you're just not taking them. And like what you just described as well, it's like a lot of these anti-vax communities, they're able to sort of sell this idea because, of course, people are mistrustful of big pharma. And, of course, big pharma is responsible for all kinds of evil things. But the evil things that you're describing is that kind of stuff, like price gouging, hoarding these vaccines in these wealthy countries while not giving them to the countries that need them in the global south and the developing world. That's the evil vaccine conspiracy. But it's just this moment has been overtaken by these kind of reactionary anti-vax weirdos who are using people's very real skepticism about big pharma to ensure that less people take the vaccine, which again ensures the pandemic continues, ensures that there's more variants, and ensures that all these things that seem to that they hate so much, the mask mandates and all these other public health measures, are just going to continue indefinitely.
Yeah, it's really frustrating to watch the like right-wing media and talking heads and pundits and opportunists demonize, stigmatize, spread information, whatever, about vaccines, the effects, the benefits, whatever, for partisan reasons. And it's just like, it's so frustrating to think that like, had this happened when Trump was in office, they'd be all for it. And
oh, absolutely. Yeah, of course.
What a different war. Like, not obviously I don't want fucking Trump to win, but like, it just, we'd live in a different world, and that they are so brazenly partisan and willing to turn anything into a culture war for personal gain. Like, just it's really weird that it also puts like their own supporters on the front lines. Like they fucking hate you. Like they hate like the middle America, like working class, like right. They hate them. They despise them, and they are willing to sell them out and put them in harm's way for personal gain. It's really something. I'm curious to see the effects it's going to have on midterms as they're fucking killing off their base.
I mean, the inescapable conclusion that you kind of can't get away from as well is that a lot of these people in right-wing media and in the right-wing political sphere are willingly like spreading this kind of misinformation and like openly encouraging people to get this virus and die from it because that looks politically bad for Joe Biden and the Joe Biden administration. And I don't want to give them too much credit for like handling the pandemic very well, because they stopped a lot of the important public health measures as soon as they got in an effort to show how the America was like moving on from it and everything. But like, in terms of like the deaths and the people the cases, in terms of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, like it's very, very similar. There hasn't been a huge difference in that. Part of it is a failure on the part of the Democrats and the part of the Joe Biden administration. But there's another part, which is that Republicans have kind of deliberately sacrificed hundreds of thousands of their own supporters in an effort to kind of politically damage the Biden administration. Now they're going to go into the next midterms kind of crying about Biden's responsibility for this, when they've kind of deliberately and knowingly made this problem worse. It's pretty sick. Yeah. I don't understand like what other conclusion you could possibly reach.
I don't know if you saw, but today there was a blurb about a group of Republican senators who wanted to temporarily augment the filibuster rules to allow a 51 vote threshold to oppose and repeal any vaccine mandates. And it's just like, oh, it's not about process. It's just they want that threshold for things that they want, but they don't want it for anything the Democrats want, like minimum wage, healthcare, voting rights, nothing. They're totally fine with a 51 vote threshold to repeal vaccine mandates. It's insane. That's another thing, though. Also, as I'm like researching this, like and preparing for this Europe trip, like Germany is just like, if you're unvaccinated, you can't go anywhere. Like, fuck off. Like, you're in lockdown. Like, you can get a vaccine.
That's what it is in Quebec as well. Yeah.
Yeah, just like they get it. Like, no, if you're doing this, you don't get to participate in society. Who cares?
Yeah. And I think I was looking at the stats, and I think America's like they're stuck at I think you're stuck at like 53% of the country,
which is nuts because we hit that so fast.
I know, that's it. That's and amazing.
We just
it's really amazing.
Just plateaued and haven't moved. I just got a booster yesterday, and honestly, I feel like I got hit by a truck, but it's fucking worth it.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, another thing that's going on. You talked about the midterms a couple of times, and also this like Supreme Court now fight that is happening, which apparently is entirely the fault of Susan Sarandon. Mm-hmm. Susan Sarandon, once again, as soon as anything bad happens with the Supreme Court, there's some kind of a listserv or a memo that goes out to like the weirdest Democratic Party holdouts that just insist on relitigating the 2015 and 2016 primary process over and over and over endlessly, and blame Hollywood actress Susan Sarandon for the circumstances facing America, which is pretty remarkable.
We've got issues with our voting and electoral system in the States. And look, I'll just admit, maybe allowing her vote to count for 15 million votes in Michigan and Pennsylvania.
In hindsight, that didn't make a lot of sense.
That's probably not the best idea.
Yeah.
No, it's just like it's so ludicrous that that's their go-to target, just because she like dared say that as a Democrat in California that she wouldn't vote for Hillary. Like, it does not matter. It does not matter at all. But they can't, like, the Democrats can't fail. They can only be failed. So it's not the Hillary campaign's fault for running a lackluster, uninspiring campaign that really only appealed to coastal Democrats. It's not the Hillary campaign's fault for not campaigning in key swing states in the run-up to the election and only at the last minute. It's not the campaign's fault for failing to talk about economic material issues and previously supporting the TPP and then only flipping when it was politically opportunistic or politically expedient. Things that would have a real impact on workers in Ohio and in Pennsylvania and in Michigan that all went for Trump in 2016. Those issues weren't really at the forefront. It was a lot of identity-based issues. It was a lot of like continuing the Obama legacy, maintaining the status quo, and this kind of like outrage, like pearl clutching over, oh, look how uncouth Trump is. And look, if you are in those areas, why would you fucking care about that? You need help. And those issues that festered under Obama that largely went ignored and especially exacerbated in the wake of the financial crisis. And then you see the Democrats kind of caving and allowing banks to bailing them out and then allowing them to give bonuses to their executives as a result. Why would you think that that's a party concerned about your well-being? I think we talked about this with Sirota a couple weeks ago. His show Meltdown is like a great review of that immediate post-financial collapse moment in America and how the Democrats really just shit the bed. And like, why, if you are a quote low information voter who, just kind of pays attention and you really don't have the luxury in your life to worry about some of these other things, you're worried about putting food on the table. Why would you think that 4 more years of an Obama era policy would improve your life? And look, Trump was obviously a charlatan. But he really broke out in that cycle and was talking hollowly about some of those issues. And if you're quote low information voter and you hear that and you don't really hear that from the other side, I understand why people went for him. And it's not a tweet from an actress that did it. But these people don't want to. This is especially people affiliated with that campaign or in support of that campaign professionally. They don't want to admit that. It's always someone else's fault because they missed a wide open layup, and they can't acknowledge that. They will never take responsibility for that.
Yeah, I think that's been the most like the weirdest thing about seeing some of these conversations play out is just the complete inability to examine their own political choices and maybe ask themselves some critical questions about things that they possibly could have done differently. Like you said, it's always someone else's fault. They've been doing it was before the Clinton campaign. For years it was Ralph Nader was that guy from the 2000 election, never examining their own responsibility in losing that election, which they didn't even lose. Gore literally won the election, and they pretty much allowed Republicans to just steal it. But it would have been too politically difficult to like say, hey, can you stop stealing the election? So they didn't. But that's Ralph Nader's fault. And then so they're always looking for these scapegoats, whether it's Nader, whether it's Bernie Sanders, whether it's Susan Sarandon, for anything other than examining their own culpability in these things. And specifically when you're talking about abortion, which is what is being debated right now in the Supreme Court, and it's a very scary moment for women across America who are very rightfully concerned that they might be losing this right, which should be, a fundamental part of the healthcare that they have access to. And that's the thing, talking about Obama specifically, I just saw this tweet today. In a speech given to Planned Parenthood Action Fund on July 17th, 2007, Obama declared, "The first thing I'd do as president is sign the Freedom of Choice Act." In a press conference on April 29th, 2009, the Freedom of Choice Act was not highest legislative priority.
Nope.
And there's 6 months, as Sirota's talked about endlessly, there was 6 months there with a complete supermajority. He had the political ability to do a lot of things, including respond to the financial crisis differently, including taking this decision to codify the Freedom of Choice Act into law, and he just didn't do it. And like they will never be able to like blame themselves for these very crucial mistakes that they're now paying for. And they're always looking for a scapegoat. I mean, we heard about Russia was another big part of it. If it wasn't Susan Sarandon, it was the devious Russians that cost Hillary the election. There's just an endless list of excuses and all the very real, tangible ways that anyone can point out the ways that they fucked this up and blew it and led directly to this current moment are just never discussed, never really elaborated on. And it's looking like they're heading in toward yet another election cycle. They're talking about running Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris. They've learned nothing, and they're somehow expecting a different result. And, after a certain point, you have to start to wonder. It just seems like this is just what they want to do.
Yeah, this gives them something to scaremonger over, and they're much more comfortable as an opposition party. And they probably figured that leaving that on the table would be a good motivator later down the line in elections. And this is probably, if this decision comes down and they do gut it or repeal it or whatever. And it's not just Roe, it's also Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which is another case that implemented this undue burden framework within the trimester framework and allowed states to really start to chip away at abortion rights. But you also have these trigger laws that will go into effect where states will 20 some states are just going to probably outright ban it. And that's terrifying and totally unfair. And like you say, it should be a fundamental right. Like you should be able to exercise total bodily autonomy over your reproductive system. It's absolutely bullshit that we're even in this moment. And again, the Democrats could have done something in early 2009 after Obama took office, and they didn't. And it's nobody's fault but their own now because they fucking played with fire and now they got burnt. So we talked about this with the law boy also. Another person that there's always a debate over, should this person get blamed? It's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she stayed on the court. She was thriving in that cult of personality over the notorious RPG stuff. And she remained on the court until she died and Trump was in office. She couldn't make it through his first term. But now we're having this moment of panic where Democrats can't really push back on some of these things in the Supreme Court. And it could get worse. It could absolutely get worse. Because what if, let's say Trump, here's the thing, Trump's running again in 2024, and let's say he wins. And let's say Stephen Breyer doesn't retire before then. Then what?
Yeah.
Then what? Then you have Sotomayor and Kagan to push back on this stuff. That's it.
Yeah. You also get the sense that they've got a lot of, I think, really reactionary plans kind of hidden up their sleeve while they're waiting, while there's no possible chance that there's going to be able to push back on that. That's another thing. People have been begging Joe Biden and the Biden administration to reform the Supreme Court and reform this ridiculous system where these conservatives can just completely arbitrarily overwrite any possible good progressive legislation that they put together. This is all the stuff that's been really frustrating, and it was predictable, but I guess I allowed myself to believe that maybe they would possibly consider some of these things, like expanding the Supreme Court, like getting rid of the filibuster, like actually doing things to just force through their agenda. They haven't done it. And the Democrats, if they end up losing this grip on power that they have right now, they're going to be looking around and saying, whoa, what happened? But it's very similar to the beginning of the Obama era. They had an opportunity. They had a mandate to make some really serious changes to the way things are done. That's why people voted for them in that election. And they've just not done any of it. And now it's heading right exactly back towards the same sort of a situation going into the midterms, where it's looking like they are going to, whatever slim majority they have and their slim ability to actually advance anything positive is going to be pretty much gone away, possibly forever, in the next year or so.
Yeah, we had this Supreme Court commission on, I don't know if you remember that. Biden appointed this bipartisan group of legal experts to explore the legality of expanding the court. And they came back and they were like, nah. But what if you put term limits on the justices? And then that nothing happened. No proposals, nothing. And they can't even really do anything because you've got Manchin and Sinema standing in the way, which I think is just so appalling, where you have Sinema just reveling in this role of heel, where she aesthetically supports all of these things and is really outraged by these anti-choice decisions and all this terrible stuff, but she could get out of the way and they could try to do something about it. Then it would just be Manchin, and they would just put all this singular focus on Manchin to enact some of these reforms. But no, she's standing in the way. And then on one of the other things she's standing on the way on, and this is just really illustrates her role as heel. I just saw a story before we went live. She's potentially opposed to this reconciliation Build Back Better bill, which she had initially said she wasn't, in order to help get the bipartisan infrastructure bill through.
Yeah.
And some reporter tweeted out that her ringtone on her phone now is, "You don't have the votes." The line, "You don't have the votes," from the musical Hamilton. It's just dude, first of all, get a fucking personality.
Yeah.
It's good, but it's not just, okay, relax. She's reveling in this role as heel.
In all honesty, too, I had very low expectations for this Joe Biden administration. I was kind of encouraged by some of the boldness that was going into this Build Back Better agenda. And I was thinking, like, wow, as much as I didn't really expect Joe Biden to kind of go in that direction, it certainly seems like either he or some of the advisors that are close to this, or close to the higher levels of power in the Democratic Party, have kind of got this idea. They understand this idea that they need to really do. They really do need to like pass a big progressive agenda that's popular, that helps people. That's how they're going to, not lose elections. It kind of seems like they might get this. And it's been very strange, just even with those low expectations, seeing that Build Back Better framework, which is supposed to be the whole centerpiece of his whole agenda that he campaigned on, slowly get whittled away. And now kind of being faced with the prospect of like, oh, they might not even pass anything at all besides this bipartisan infrastructure bill, I think that's significantly under my already extremely low expectations. Like that, I must admit, the idea that they were just not sure they're going to whittle it down, they're going to water it down, they're going to, means test and take away the things that people like about it. Surely there'll still be some good things. The idea that they might just not do anything at all, it didn't even occur to me. So it's like, I guess it's still a possibility, but I think it's also now looking like a distinct possibility that framework doesn't even get passed at all. And like you mentioned, Sinema, I mean, people are sort of now mobilizing to try and pressure her. She's facing all this kind of like protests and people that are trying to, call attention to this. I know there's talk of trying to fundraise for some kind of a primary opponent, but like, she doesn't care if she embraces this role as the heel and whittles down this whole agenda to nothing. She's just made forever. She's going to immediately, if she does get primary, she's going to go into some board of some Fortune 500 company. She's made for life. Like I don't think she really cares at all about any of that. And she's really seems to be reveling in it.
Yeah, that's also the thing. Like, she doesn't care, but also that is a tool at the Democrats' disposal, primarying, that they refuse to use. We've talked about this before, and if you like
they'll literally support people in a primary that will run counter to their own agenda, rather than primary them.
Yeah, and they would much rather keep these people in place than work with or support progressive challengers. And this is the result. It's your hands being tied by members of your own party, doing nothing, setting yourself up for future failure, and then it's somehow the progressives' fault also. Like, progressives want to change this, and they're willing to go in there and support these things. Look at all the progressives in Congress. Who's standing in the way? None. It's the moderates. And if they really cared about this, if Democrats really cared deep down, they'd say, if you don't support this, we are focusing our energy and getting you out. We're going to remove you from committees. We're going to back up. We're going to throw all the DCCC and all the DSCC, whatever, resources behind an opponent to take you out. And they won't do it. And instead, you have people like Josh Gottheimer, who is a moderate Dem who has been dragging his feet and standing in the way of all this stuff the entire time. And he is working with Hakeem Jeffries and other House Dems leadership, to create this PAC, Team Blue, that specifically protects Democrat incumbents from progressive challengers, namely Justice Democrats challengers. So you have him, on the one hand, standing in the way and impeding progress on reconciliation and Build Back Better, while simultaneously working with House Dem leadership, including Hakeem Jeffries, to keep all these same people in power. If they actually cared about that, they'd kill it. They'd get him out of the way. They would threaten to strip him from committees and threaten to primary him, along with Sinema and along with Manchin. But they don't fucking care. They don't care at the end of the day.
It kind of seems like they just don't want to do this stuff at all. And a lot of this is just signaling to more progressive voters that we really want to do this stuff. If only we had a few more senators, or if only you voted a little bit more. You didn't do enough. That's the game that they've been playing, like, literally as long as I've been paying attention to this, like almost 20 years now. And like, after a certain point, it's just inescapable that it's like, this is just, it's just this never-ending hamster wheel where they're convincing people every single year, it's the most important election, yada, yada, yada. And it doesn't really seem like they actually want to do any of these progressive things, no matter how much they might sound serious about it. I mean, that's the inescapable conclusion,
Yeah. It's an easy fix. If you want to move the needle, I mean, just even also on barnstorming the country and stumping in these people's states or in their districts, they won't do it. They did it one time with Manchin early on in the COVID relief bill, and he complained and he got mad at them and they stopped. They're, oh, sorry, sir. Yes, sir. And that's it.
Yeah.
That should demonstrate that it's effective. It's unbelievable that they would just, okay, sorry, we won't do it again. Unbelievable. I really...
Yeah.
They are so fucking feckless.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's after a certain point, it's like, are they feckless? And I think this is what's been interesting about listening to Sirota lately, is like, he seems to be reaching the same conclusion. It's like, it's nice for them to think that they just don't know what they're doing, but it's after a certain point, you have to accept that they do know very well what they're doing. And they just don't have the same priorities or values. They're beholden to many of the same private interests that the Republicans are. And a lot of their approach, really the main difference is rhetorical. It's just entirely in the signaling and in the speeches. And when it comes to actual time to pass legislation that might alleviate some of these numerous crises that are just grinding people into dust, when it comes time to actually do that, they're not really too interested in it. And eventually that's just going to result in more and more people just completely dropping out of participating in that political process. And, you can't really blame them after a certain point. If it feels like these people don't have any of their interest in mind, to say nothing of the foreign policy element of it as well, which is like also a completely sort of bipartisan consensus, which is just violent and destructive no matter who's in power. So it's like people are just not going to vote for this party anymore, and that's just the inevitable result. And instead of, again, as the midterms pass, the next election pass, no matter what happens, it's not really looking good. But rather than look back at this moment and talk about why did Joe Manchin block our agenda? Why didn't we do this? Why didn't we do that? They're going to be, I don't know if they'll complain still about Sarandon. They might find some other Hollywood actor or actress. It's always going to be something else. Maybe they'll shift it to more of a China thing. China actually hacked the election or something, or spread disinformation that caused people to not vote. But the one thing that they won't do, and we can say this with many, many years of experience of watching this now, is maybe take responsibility for their own lack of action and their own decisions that they made.
At the end of the day, it's a money-making scheme for all these people. They'll trim around the edges. They'll maybe make some slight changes here and there, but they don't ultimately care. It's a lot of like legacy making. Like, this is just like a vanity project for Biden right now. For most people in Washington, it's a way where they can get rich. They have power, they gain fame, and they get rich. A lot of people just don't care about the issues. A lot of people don't really care about other people. It's just a way that they can get rich.
Do you still believe in this idea of continuing to run progressive candidates in this party? Like, I think that's something like when you saw after the Bernie Sanders initial campaign in 2016, and you saw, AOC get elected and Ilhan Omar and these progressive Congress people, it felt like there was this kind of momentum or movement towards, getting more and more of a progressive voices in this party, which could possibly change things. Have you changed your view on that at all? Like, are you disillusioned with that? Do you still think that's a worthwhile project for people to get involved in? That's another thing we talked about, right? Is that the progressive caucus, they had way more of a, they've got more people. They've got the ability to veto legislation. They've got kind of bargaining power. We talked about this a couple months ago, but still they seem really reticent to actually use that. And so it's hard to know how many more progressive Congress members you would actually need to actually be able to meaningfully influence the Democratic Party, like the Democratic Party establishment. Not only along people, but we're still talking about a long-term project that's still probably, at least a decade away from really bearing meaningful fruit. Are you disillusioned about that at all, or do you still think that's something that is worthwhile that people should focus on?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, that seems like the only real vehicle. They are obviously going to make it as hard as possible, but we don't really have a viable third-party avenue in this country. Like, it's just too unrealistic. So
no, and as others have pointed out, even if you had a third party created overnight, that theoretical third party to do anything progressive or anything good would still have to caucus probably with the Democratic Party, and all those same problems would still be there, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's the thing. People have kind of leaned on that as some kind of miracle solution that's going to somehow even things out, but I don't think it's quite as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see that changing, but I also think you got to at least try and just understand that it's going to be a ton of losses. It's going to be an uphill climb, but I mean, that just seems like the best thing to do, as futile as it may be.
Yeah, and I remember we talked last year with Josh Androsky, talked the emphasis on local politics as well. I think no matter where you are as well, that's something that there are progressive and positive things you can accomplish in a local elections that you can kind of focus on, and the winnable battles there as well. But also people have to start looking at, ideas that exist outside this electoral space as well, and getting involved in more organizing, workplace organizing, because it's this idea that, and I think this applies to Canada as well. This is not just about the United States, but eventually we're just going to vote. Enough people are going to be there that we can have the votes, that we can do these positive things. But it's certainly the inescapable feeling that I've been getting for the last year especially, is just that our whole government, such as it is, just exists to keep this kind of machine rolling at all costs. And you can make these little tweaks around the edges electorally, and you can enact some positive things that maybe help a few people. But overall, if you believe in these big structural changes, big, bold structural changes to the way these institutions function, there's really not a way that you can accomplish that through this kind of electoralism. I mean, we talked a lot about the strike wave, right? And how positive that can be for people. And I think that's a lesson that people need to learn as well, is that a lot of these positive changes can take place completely outside the system, and through more union organization can really lift people's quality of life completely outside of that context.
Yeah, I think just advocate and fight for and be part of campaigns pushing for the things that you believe in. And I've just been growing increasingly cynical on electoral politics as a solution, because you would think that after 2016 they would have had a wake-up call and assessed what was going wrong and implemented changes, and in 2018 they largely ran on healthcare, and they were very successful with that messaging. And Biden then ran on a public option, and some people felt, I was not one of them, but some people felt that they were going to push for a public option because that is a winning approach. That is something that even when I was down at the pro-January 6th rally interviewing people, I would ask them, like, what do you want Trump to do if he runs again? Like, people were saying universal healthcare. It's a problem that a bipartisan consensus of people identify with. And Democrats could be the party that resolves it, at least partially. And they won't. They won't do it. So they just completely abandoned this winning message and this winning strategy just 2 years later. He hasn't talked about it. He hasn't mentioned it. He hasn't fought for it since the election. That's it. They just could totally abandon it. It's a problem that persists. You don't understand like how bad the marketplace is. So this site where you go if you need health insurance and you don't have it through your employer, and you have to go on this site and type in all this information to see what you might qualify for, and then it gives you all these different things with these opaque titles like the patient plus bronze tier plan, and like then you have to navigate all of this different thing. Oh, well, your premium is going to be this, and your deductible is going to be that, and then you've got an out-of-pocket max, and you've got all these different things. And like you might think, my partner had to do it because she's a musician, and there's obviously no health insurance for musicians. So she's trying to navigate it, and I'm like helping her, like looking through it. And she finds this plan. She's like, oh, this is great. This is like within my budget. It covers all my stuff. This is great. And then we look it up. There's no providers in her area that even take this insurer. And it's just like, Jesus Christ, so it's back to square one. And then the things that did seem best and optimal for her aren't even, she doesn't make a lot of money. Like she's a musician. And like, it was like $400 or $500 a month. And she's like, I can't afford this. And this is the solution. They want to improve on this. People fucking hate it. People hate it. No one likes navigating all this
popular.
Shit.
Yeah.
And that's what they want to do. They want to defend that because it's fucking Obama's legacy. They're so fucking stupid.
Well, that is the amazing thing too about the Obama era, right? Because you had that first 6 months, that all that political capital, all that huge mandate, it all went into like enshrining this private system permanently, basically, and maybe making it ever so slightly less cruel for a few people, and that's what they spent all their political capital on before getting completely wiped out. And that's the thing with the Biden administration, is that they are on that exact path right now. Like it feels, there's this pervasive feeling right now that there's a major like reactionary backlash kind of brewing. And if you look at like Biden's polling is like completely underwater right now. Like they're really headed for this completely disastrous couple of elections here. And I don't know. I don't even know if we truly understand the extent to how bad that can possibly get if these reactionaries completely kind of take over the U.S. government. But they're headed there. They're headed there right now. We on this show have tried to very helpfully offer a number of suggestions and outcomes that could maybe avoid that future. They've followed through on none of them, and they're heading for total calamity.
They should listen to us more.
I agree. I thought we need more White House people blasting this into Joe Biden's hearing aid or something.
Yeah. We need this. We need insurgents on Joe Biden's Spotify Wrapped next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
then all the problems will be fixed.
That's right.
America will be fixed.
But also, for those of you who did tweet at us and showing that the show was in your Spotify Wrapped, thank you. If you did not, I hope you have a terrible 2022.
They were probably listening to it on other platforms.
I'm not giving them a fucking pass, Rob.
Yeah. They should be playing it on Spotify too, just to boost our numbers, right? Just playing it when they're not around or even listening.
No, I think most of the listeners from the data, most of the listeners are on other platforms. But it is nice to see every once in a while a Spotify thing pop up. It is nice.
Well, this has been, don't want to say fun, but it's been good to catch up with you again. We're going to have a year in review. We're going to have a year in review episode coming up next. That's going to come out when Jordan's away. I'm looking forward to that. We're thinking of some great guests we can bring on for that.
Yeah.
Bring it on. We're heading all the way to 2022.
Let's go. Year 3.
Oh boy. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. That's all for now. We'll be back soon. You'd think that after 2 years I'd have a good wrap up, but come on, not so much.
All right. Study over break. Work on something over break, and then
yeah, we're gonna really knock it out of the park next in 2020.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to The Insurgents. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can find us on iTunes or Spotify or at Substack, theinsurgents.substack.com. You'll get the latest episodes delivered straight to your inbox as well as our newsletter. On Twitter, we are at InsurgentsPod. Tweet at us, harass Ken in our replies, and then send us your hate mail to theinsurgentspod@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening.